Okay, here we go. Stand by. 3, 2, 1, action.
Assume nothing.
Brash, bald-faced blasphemy.
Question everything.
I find it extremely hard to imagine.
Open your eyes.
It is quite all right to be an atheist.
The fastest growing group of people in the country has been measured as being those who have no belief or who are atheists.
You don't have to be apologetic or quiet about it.
Challenge the opposition.
You see religion on 100 fronts losing the argument.
And start thinking. This is The Thinking Atheist Worldwide.
You know, I grew up in a culture that loved to draw American history in crayon, essentially. You know, when they taught us about the founding fathers and the constitutional framework of the United States and political parties and their positions and this country at war, from the Revolutionary War to the Civil War to World War II to Vietnam and beyond, to the Cold War, you know. I remember former Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara once called it a hot war because it was so intense. You had two global superpowers on the razor's edge all the time. Well, historian and expert Dr. Mark Stoller teaches a fantastic lecture series on these and so much more. It's called The Skeptic's Guide to American History. It is tailor-made for this audience. You want to get into the founding fathers as, you know, slave owners and other things? Dr. Stoller talks about that. You want to see how different liberalism and conservatism were 100 or even 200 years ago? Dr. Stoller talks about it. You want to talk about slavery, the end of slavery, suffrage, the civil rights movement, and a whole lot more with nuance and actual data? Explore and enjoy The Skeptic's Guide to American History at the Great Courses Plus. You can stream or download over 8,500 different lectures on a huge variety of subjects, from history to cosmology, health and nutrition, how to play the guitar, foreign languages, and so much more. The Great Courses Plus just added an audio-only option, so you can audio stream the courses like a radio podcast. The Great Courses Plus is really something you've got to experience for yourself, and you can do that right now. They are giving my listeners a free and full month of unfiltered, unlimited access to their whole lecture library. Everything for free, but you have to sign up through my special URL. So get started today. You're going to love it. Sign up at thegreatcoursesplus.com/Seth. That's thegreatcoursesplus.com/Seth. You know, lately when I look around on social media, and in the media in general, really, I see these proclamations that the atheist movement is on life support. It's dying. It's probably beyond saving. Now, I know some people out there are very weary of all the public infighting and the squabbling and the division and just the general nastiness out there between various camps, and I totally get that. I totally get it. Some people draw a big circle around new atheism, quote unquote, new atheism, which is just atheism, by the way. And they declare new atheism is dead, or it's dying, or irrelevant, or whatever. Mention the names of the four horsemen, right? The four atheists who arguably have gotten the most press in the last decade: Richard Dawkins, Sam Harris, Daniel Dennett, and the late Christopher Hitchens. And you're likely to see an immediate and almost visceral reaction, both pro and con. Some people say, you know, they're out there making a difference and changing lives, these four horsemen, and other people say they are relics. And especially in regard to Dawkins and Harris, they're just awful human beings. We see passive atheists, we see activist atheists, diplomatic atheists, firebrand atheists, and so many other shades of atheist out there. Some people say that atheism is this. Others dictate, well, atheism is that. You see beautiful people who are atheists. You see horrible people who are atheists. It's a kaleidoscope out there. It's an overwhelming barrage of people and ideas and claims and refutations and expectations and questions. As an atheist activist myself, you know, I can understand why some activists have simply just left the party. They just got tired of it, all the politics and the posturing and the trolls And the bad faith operators out there, they've seen firsthand that atheists are not immune to scandal, to ugliness, to irrationality, to this unhealthy rage, to the almost nonstop keyboard mashing, constantly escalating toxicity that has tragically found its oxygen on the global soapbox of the internet. And the internet is a beautiful thing. The internet is a beautiful thing. Everyone with an opinion can now be heard. But the internet is a terrible thing because now everyone with an opinion can be heard. It was 2008, the year 2008, in November, when I first called myself an atheist, when I first admitted out loud that I was an atheist. I was still being introduced to the whole idea of living without any allegiance to any gods or any ideas of gods, not having to filter the real world through the Bible and its claims, these often bizarre and terrible claims. I didn't start every question with the false security that I already knew the answer with a capital A. I didn't live in fear of judgment, divine judgment, eternal judgment. November 2008. I was pretty naive at the time. I hadn't even started the Thinking Atheist website. It launched in the early summer, I think, of 2009. At that time, at first, I assumed that my religious friends and family would be just fascinated by my explorations into the Bible. The Bible's problems, its flaws, its contradictions, its immorality. The Bible's a mess. Wow. I can show people this and they will see me as a reasonable guy taking his own journey and making some life-altering discoveries. And all of these believers are going to be so eager to take the journey with me. And of course, it didn't take long before I better understood the psychology of belief, things like belief reinforcement and the backfire effect and confirmation bias and the myriad reasons why people protect irrational religion against rational claims. I also had kind of a one-dimensional view of atheism, especially on the internet. There weren't a lot of resources out there, especially compared to now. I saw Atheist Nexus. There were a few other websites, a few forums. There was a blog here and a blog there. And of course, I was reading books by Richard Dawkins. The God Delusion was huge for me. Christopher Hitchens. I was reading Charles Templeton. Dan Barker's Godless was huge for me. But, in those moments, the conversations were mostly about the challenging of religious claims, usually the big two, Christianity and Islam. I didn't see a whole lot of conversations about how the rejection of religion might inform or encourage social activism beyond atheism. Mostly it was just the deconstruction of holy books and the explorations into the historicity of the major players, Jesus and Muhammad and where did they come from, and debunking the major creation myths out there with an avalanche of evidence that supported evolution. And a bunch of lofty scientific stuff about the Big Bang and the age of the universe and the evolution of life on Earth and the reality that the whole universe functioned under natural, not supernatural laws. Online, in atheist activism, we certainly had our subgroups and our splinters back then. But atheist activism was pretty straightforward. We saw a whole lot of memes at that time, mostly boiling down to variations on, Jesus Christ is Santa Claus for adults. And it's time to grow up, people. We see these old memes occasionally surface today, and we kind of have a nostalgia feeling about them. You're like, oh, I remember back when I first saw the meme about Noah's Ark and this punchline, right? They're like yesterday's news. It's almost like looking at a time capsule. I saw some very uncharitable language in regard to religious people at the time, and I wrote about this when I wrote my book, Deconverted. I was lamenting insults like religitard and creatard, which were actually belief reinforcers when atheists would use them against Christians or believers of all stripes. They would cause these believers to feel attacked, and then the believer would just double down on the very thing we were asking them to reject. It also fed in the insulter this sort of smug sense of superiority and intellectual elitism. Look how smart I am. Look how stupid you are, you creatard. I mean, the notion that religious people are stupid was not remotely rooted in the evidence. It just puffed up the person who made the claim. And it was one of the first kinds of toxicity that I was introduced to as a new atheist, meaning new that I was new to the movement. I was a freshly emerged apostate. I saw this sort of I'm better than you are flavor of atheist activism that didn't seem all that interested in helping people drowning in superstition, wasn't interested in tossing them a life preserver or even instructing them how to swim. It was just happy to mock them from the shore. And I think about it. How might I have felt when I was going through my own series of doubts and questions and explorations and discoveries if I'd stumbled across one of these toxic people? Someone who wrote me off and ridiculed me, and who wasn't interested in tossing me that life preserver or teaching me how to swim, or at least showing me where the shallows were. They had declared me the other. I wasn't worth the time. I wasn't worth the energy, the investment, the risk, the sacrifice. Now, fortunately, those people were more the exception, I think, than the rule. I mean, even on the internet, it became apparent. It became obvious, I think. There was so much goodness out there beyond the cocoon that had surrounded me for most of my life. I came out of religion, and I looked around, and I just felt awake. I was out of the bubble. And the Thinking Atheist website and the YouTube videos and then the radio broadcast, the podcast online, became kind of an extension of my own journey. It became a reflection of my desire to be a part of the conversations out there and hopefully a resource that might help somebody else who was going through the same thing, or perhaps someone who wanted to understand what an escapee from fundamentalism might be going through. I say this all the time when people ask me, why do you do what you do? It pretty much comes down to one sentence. I say, you know what? I want to learn stuff and I want to help people. Now, for an everyman like me, that totally works. It's just a reflection of me. It's my mind and my heart, I want to learn something and I want to help people. Sometimes a young person will come up and ask me to sign something, whether it's a book or just a piece of paper or whatever. Hey, sign this, would you? And I will write as a signature to the child, I'll say, make every day a discovery. And that's exactly what I want. It's what I wish someone had encouraged me to do when I was a young person. Or just a person, just live your life, be curious, make every day a discovery. This is what I want for everybody, including me. And the blinders are off. The religious rule books go right out the window. There are no sacred cows. There's no forbidden zones. There's no taboos. Not when it comes to learning, enhancing what we know, discovering, evolving. I'm not a PhD. I'm not a profound thinker. I'm not a Victor Stenger or a Steven Pinker or a Eugenie Scott or whoever. I'm just a guy. I'm a guy, a former Christian broadcaster turned heathen broadcaster. I'm a producer, a storyteller. I'm just a guy. I'm just a guy trying to figure things out like everybody else. And I think that at least partially explains the popularity of the Thinking Atheist podcast. Because, while some people look up to the academic types, these lofty brains, these amazingly smart people, they look up to them. They relate to me, right? They get me. I'm just some guy. I'm a guy who wakes up every morning and looks around and says, hey, wait a minute, I didn't know that. Tell me more about that. I was wrong about that. Let's try this. What's this about over here, right? I mean, on the broadcast, sometimes you'll hear me, I ask my interviewees questions. Sometimes when I ask the questions, I already know the answer that's coming because I kind of want to set them up to communicate the answer. Sometimes I don't know, and I'm curious myself. And then the audience and I can sort of travel that road of discovery together. And in some ways, the people that I encounter, the people I've met, the callers to the show and the conference attendees and the people who come out for all the speaking tour stops or whatever, they have in many ways become like my family. I mean, you have to remember my rejection of my parents' cherished religion has had the unfortunate consequence of really straining our relationship. I mean, we're pleasant to each other, but we don't really know each other. I mean, we're strangers. My family will always be my family. That much is very true. but I don't have a real strong connection to my mother and father especially. We don't communicate. We barely see each other on holidays. And that is largely because they genuinely do not accept me for who I am. They are Christ believers. They are fundamentalist Bible believers. And as such, they don't think that I have the right to live my life on my terms. They believe my life automatically belongs to their God. And my rejection of God in many ways is a betrayal of them. And so they take my criticism of their pet religion personally. And so because I'm also convinced that family is sometimes the family that you choose, the family that acts like family, a great many people within the atheist movement, and I'm going to get into definitions here in a minute, so relax, the atheist movement, many of those people have become my family. They act like family. They accept me without requiring agreement. They're friends. They support me. They counsel. They love me for who I am. So now, what happens when I hear these warnings out there that the atheist movement is yesterday's news, or that it is self-destructing? Or worse yet, it's sort of mutating into some kind of hate group, which is the vibe you get from some of the more hyperbolic voices out there. Is the atheist movement dying? Well, first, let's talk about the atheist movement. How do you define the movement? Capital T, capital M, the movement. What is the movement? If you had to write it up as a dictionary definition, how would you encapsulate or describe it? And immediately this presents the problem, right? Because as my buddy Matt Dillahunty often says, there is not a single atheist movement. There are a bunch of atheist movements, many of them operating in their own relatively insulated microcosms. You'll find YouTube atheists. You'll find those who focus almost exclusively on creating online video content. They don't have podcasts, or maybe they do video podcast, which fits in with the other videos. You probably don't see many of them on the convention circuit. Most haven't written a book. Maybe they're not even bloggers. You have the more science-y atheist activists, the PhD types who do write the books and submit the higher profile articles for publications like the New York Times and Scientific American and Nature. Lawrence Krauss, right? The theoretical physicist. He's a great example. And Krauss provides some crossover into the convention aspect of atheist activism. He speaks at events like Imagine No Religion and the Freedom from Religion Foundation Conference, the American Atheist National Convention. You'll find lots of other convention speakers. They run the gamut from people like Mandisa Thomas of Black Nonbelievers to Aaron Ra. He's currently running for Texas Senate. You got Faisal Saeed Al-Muhtar. He's the president of Ideas Beyond Borders. You got Margaret Downey, the founder of the Free Thought Society. You got former pastor Dan Barker of the FFRF. You got Sarah Haider and Mohammed Syed of Ex-Muslims of North America. You got Hemant Mehta of the Friendly Atheist, etc. You got podcaster atheists, of which I am one. More podcasters every day. There's podcasters on top of podcasters. They're everywhere. We've never had this many choices out there. Everywhere. Cognitive dissonance and dogma debate, which recently got picked up by Podcast One out of Los Angeles. You got The Scathing Atheist and The Atheist Experience. And that segued out of Austin, Texas, off a public access TV channel to reach a global audience on the internet. So many others out there. So many other podcasts. There's a movement of atheists who've dedicated their lives to helping people damaged by religion. You've got Recovering from Religion, which says on their own website, you are not alone and we are here to help. Dr. Darrell Ray, he's got books, several books, and a podcast called Secular Sexuality that helps those people whose notions of human sexuality were just totally screwed up by religion and the rules imposed by religion, and the constant guilt and the shame that accompanied the church's teachings about sex. You want to see an example of where the church is hugely dysfunctional? Let the church teach you about sex. Darrell Ray's part of the solution out there, doing what he does, speaking to his area of expertise, helping people. The Secular Therapy Project provides mental health resources for people who want science-based not religion-based, science-based mental health professionals to help them with their own journeys, their own struggles. You got Grief Beyond Belief. What a wonderful organization. It was founded by Rebecca Hensler. And she sometimes speaks at free thought events about the loss of her own child. She lost her son back in 2009. It was a boy named Jude. He lived for 90 days and then passed away. And now Rebecca has dedicated her life, and her team has dedicated their efforts at Grief Beyond Belief to provide resources for other people who are navigating tragedy. They're navigating those tragedies beyond these religious notions of God's will, God's divine plan, tragedy caused by Satan, or our own sin nature, or God needed another angel in heaven, or any of the other empty religious platitudes that so often seem to make things worse, not better. I mean, Grief Beyond Belief is just people helping people in their darkest moments of heartbreak. You've got atheist activist musicians. You got people like Shelley Siegel. You got Stephen Talley-Cass of Monster on Sunday. You got Bad Religion. They performed at the 2012 Reason Rally in D.C. By the way, I'm coming back to the Reason Rally, so hang on. You got Tim Minchin. He's a brilliant artist who skewers religion with superlative talent and skill. His song White Wine in the Sun was on our Christmas show last year. It is hugely powerful, beautiful song. There are atheist comedians, people who use comedy as commentary on the problems with religion, and or who are just out. They're just out as non-believers for their audiences to see. You got Bill Maher and Jim Jeffries and Sarah Silverman and Keith Lowell Jensen, Julia Sweeney, Doug Stanhope, Steve Hill, Mary Ellen Hooper, on and on. Their audiences range from local to regional to global. Over the last 8 years, I've seen atheist activism just run the gamut. People writing down their own stories and publishing those stories as blogs or even self-published books. You got painters depicting the beauty and the wonder of the universe on its own, without all the magical, superstitious backstory. You got protesters at places like Ken Ham's Ark Encounter. They're out there standing by the highway. They're just having a great time, happily standing together, holding up their signs that say awesome stuff like, not 2 bits for your qubits, the genocide and incest park, this fable won't float, and a personal favorite of mine, the Flintstones is not a documentary. We see political activist groups populated by atheists, run by atheists that are working tirelessly to protect church-state separation. The Freedom from Religion Foundation just won another major lawsuit against Texas Governor Greg Abbott. Abbott ordered the removal of FFRF's winter solstice nativity sign that featured the Bill of Rights. They just had a legal victory. According to Andrew Seidel up at FFRF, they've won 12 of the last 14 legal rulings. I think that's just this year. I've talked only recently with members from the team from the Secular Coalition for America. Those people are working so hard to keep church out of government and government out of church, to keep religious organizations from acting as political action committees, to keep employers from practicing religious discrimination, to remove religious privilege, where those people proclaiming that God belief gets a different set of rules than everybody else. Fighting to keep religion a private thing, a private exercise as framed by the country's founders. The Secular Coalition for America has seen a huge boost in membership since the November presidential election of last year. So has the FFRF and other secular organizations. How about the Secular Student Alliance? They provide information and toolkits for students at the high school and the college level to set up secular student groups. They function all across the United States, hundreds of groups, and more being founded by young skeptics all the time. Now, which of these is the atheist movement? Are they all doing the same thing, the same way, on the same page, using the same methods? Are they all completely in sync and aligned? Are they all the atheist movement? Well, the answer is simple enough. There is not a single atheist movement. There are so many gears in this machine. There are so many gears in this machine. Many, many people and organizations out there on the front lines of activism, they don't remotely fall into this narrow cookie cutter, used by many of the naysayers who seem way too eager, in my opinion, to just say that all of atheist activism is in free fall. and then they pronounce the patient's time of death. The atheist movement has passed away. I mean, what's that about? Now, on the radio last week, I promised I was going to do my best to approach this hot button issue fairly. And I really do want to keep that promise. It means exploring the dark side of atheist activism out there and acknowledging some of the legitimate problems that we do have. But unlike all the Chicken Littles out there who are running around and happily screaming that the sky is falling, the end is near, you and I are going to approach things without the cheat of hyperbole and overstatement, because that's what these issues and these people deserve. And if you will forgive the familiar idiom, we're just not going to toss the baby out with the bathwater, okay? Now, from this point on in the broadcast, for the sake of simplicity, and because I do have confidence that those who are not eager to miss the point will not miss the point, I'm going to occasionally refer to the atheist movement as a singular thing. Now, I'm either referring to this huge and diverse machine of all the different gears, the diverse variations of atheist people and activism and organizations and events, which might exist under this umbrella term of atheist activism. I'm going to use it in that way, or I'm going to be speaking to these notions of a singular atheist movement that's so often maligned by the armchair quarterbacks out there that say that every atheist activist represents every other atheist activist everywhere, all right? So I'm either using a broader term for simplicity so I can keep momentum as we talk to each other, or I'm referring to this sort of star chamber atheist movement that some people say is just everybody who's all in collusion with everybody else. One of the two, okay? And because I have every confidence that you're actually listening to the words that are coming out of my mouth, that you know me, you understand my intent, and that nuance is not a foreign language to you, I will occasionally say the atheist movement, and I will do so without irony or contradiction, all right? You understand how I'm using the label, how I'm using language, and you and I will go a long way toward better understanding, okay? Let me address just some things that are being said out there in the ether, and I'll start with my first point. The atheist movement has a diversity problem. I hear this charge often, and this charge is absolutely fair. We have long had a diversity problem. It's true. And the reasons for it, I think, are legion. Is there a compounded difficulty for black non-believers? As black churches have so often integrated themselves into conversations about civil rights, meaning that the black apostate or the black atheist activist is often seen as both a betrayer of God and race. Yes. Has this often made life and activism a whole lot more difficult for black atheists? Yes. Is there a need to see more atheists of color represented and promoted at every level of activism? Yes. Has there been a blind spot in some atheist circles about the need for more diversity and a better representation of people by the speaker lineups? Yes. Do we need more female faces and voices in the conversations about religion and the rejection of religion and its bad ideas? Yes. Is it true that the four horsemen, atheist activism's arguably most popular authors and icons in the 21st century, is it true that they're white guys? Yes. Should our endeavors be a better, fairer, and more accurate representation of the wide spectrum of color that is the human condition? Yes. Now, none of what I just said supports the hyperbolic claims that the atheist movement is nothing more than some kind of snickering backroom boys club with a white men only sign on the locked door. I mean, just look around, fairly look around, and you will see the various gears of atheist activism turning toward and happily embracing a more diverse and more effective machine. Look at the local, the regional, the national conferences. Do you see only white guys? Of course not. Listen to any of the huge number of free thought podcasts out there. Only white guys? Of course not. Watch the conversations held by prominent atheist activists in public forums. Is it only white guys? Of course not. The scales are imbalanced still? Yeah. But we're getting there, and we're working to get there, with much more work to be done. Now, having said that, being a white guy myself. Am I going to go cancel my podcast? Am I going to pull my books off the shelves? Am I going to stop producing videos? Am I going to cancel my public speaking engagements and remove myself from atheist activism because of what my friend Faisal calls white guilt? Do not hold your breath. Silencing somebody or dismissing someone because they are black or Asian or female or young or elderly or white or male is not the solution. We're all people. Right? We're all people, the wonderful spectrum of humanity. We all have the opportunity and responsibility to be true to ourselves, to pursue the truth, to promote the best ideas, and to help raise the tide for every other ship in a very diverse human sea. My best friend on this planet is gay. Do I have to be gay to fight alongside him against religiously imposed bigotry? Or bigotry of any kind? Do I have to be a woman to care about equality for women? Do I have to be black to care about the difficulties facing the black non-believer? Or is the better question, am I a fellow human being who can support another fellow human being in a world loaded with obstacles placed against them? I think the answer is yes. Point number 2, new atheism is dead. I saw another article along these lines just a few days ago. I've covered this before, but the very notion of new atheism is just ludicrous. The criticisms of religion existed long before this arbitrarily chosen date that happened to see best-selling books challenging religion. Again, we're back to Dawkins and Hitchens and Harris. Critics like to toss out the term new atheism like they're referring to disco, or some other pop culture trend. It's a fad. It's new atheism. These people are blissfully unaware that history's religious critics were essentially making the same overt and public criticisms of religion. Go back and put the British philosopher Bertrand Russell in a time machine and just transport him a few decades forward to here, to the year 2017, and have Bertrand Russell utter his famous line about all the great religions of the world being both untrue and harmful. Have him say it today. I'm convinced there will be some sort of armchair critic who says that Russell is a new atheist, totally unconcerned and unaware that the criticisms of religion are not new. Disbelief in gods is not new. Atheism, which has the same definition today as it has always had, is not new. Now, if you insist on labeling the works of the Four Horsemen as new atheism and then pronouncing death, the death of new atheism, well, that doesn't work either, because you're going to have to contend with the continued global blockbuster popularity of their work. The God Delusion, millions of copies sold and still going strong. Christopher Hitchens' God is Not Great, Sam Harris' Letter to a Christian Nation, Daniel Dennett Breaking the Spell. Even today, a full decade after these books originally came out, you're going to have to explain why 3 still living icons of a dead movement remain household names in many cases, especially Dawkins and Harris. They still pack auditoriums to standing room only crowds. They're still popular, they're still relevant, they're still swinging for the fences, they're still doing what they do. And as such, even the clumsily false linking of just 4 people to a contemporary atheist movement does not work. Now, given the popularity of Sam Harris and Richard Dawkins, Dan Dennett, some have decided since they can't kill their popularity, they will instead attempt to kill their credibility. Given the truth that these guys are far from perfect, they're flawed human beings that are quite capable of missteps, and we've seen them. There is an eager and waiting gallery of snipers out there who are hoping, hell, they're aching for one of these people to make a mistake. Dawkins and Harris, those guys are guilty of saying some unfortunate stuff, often in the hugely clumsy Twitterverse, but warts and all, flaws and all, bad moves and all. I still contend that these 2 activists, Richard Dawkins and Sam Harris, have done more to advance the cause of science education and the defeat of superstition. They've done more of that before breakfast than many of their sideline critics are going to accomplish in their entire lives. Is this deference and hero worship? No. Is it excusing bad ideas? No. Is it declaring that they are immune from criticism because they're globally popular? No, it's simply a perspective. It's my perspective that their decades of life-changing work should not be dumpstered over a disagreement about politics, tactics, methods, philosophies, and or ideas. A great example is Sam Harris. In my opinion, he did something hugely unfortunate on his podcast recently, saying that he rejected the Black Lives Matter movement. Now, many people have been eager to say that Sam Harris is a frothing racist. He's a white supremacist. So he goes on his podcast. He's a critic of quote-unquote identity politics, and he says that he thinks Black Lives Matter is misguided. He just doesn't think it's the way to go. And so the critics said, oh, what more proof do you need that Sam Harris is a racist? He's against black people. I think that's not sustainable. I think a more honest eye sees that this is a disagreement over tactics. Sam Harris isn't supporting bigotry. He's simply declaring his own opposition to identity politics and Black Lives Matter as the way, as the method, as the tactic, the strategy for advancing equality. This is an argument, a disagreement about tactics. Now, again, agree, disagree, whatever. I just think Sam Harris's notions here are kind of wrong-headed. I personally do like the Black Lives Matter movement and its mission. However, unlike those people who are out there just tarring and feathering the guy as a white supremacist, I see it as a position about how equality should be achieved, not that equality should not be achieved. I don't see any evidence anywhere to support the notions that he's a racist. Nor do I think that people who disagree with the Black Lives Matter movement are all racists either, because I would wager many of them are like Harris. They want the same goal of equality and respect and the defeat of hate and discrimination, but they simply disagree on how this should be framed and achieved. I get that. But it's fashionable these days to cry bigot. And in a world filled with legitimate bigots, is this assessment of Sam Harris a fair one? And why can't we strongly and even passionately disagree with Sam Harris about an idea or a method or a philosophy without declaring that he's the devil? And this brings me to my third point. The atheist movement is splintered. And it totally is. I totally buy this one. Anybody watching recent and extremely public discussions, debates, arguments, accusations, charges, insults, and the often maddening rage porn, which seems to have just suffocated social media. Atheist people, atheist activists, atheist pages, just suffocating their pages. Anybody watching has no doubt that there is trouble in paradise. But here's the thing. It wasn't ever paradise to begin with. And beyond the recreational outrage, and the petty tribalism, and the character assassination, and the just toxic awfulness that fuels these flame wars out there, beyond the gleeful escalation and this us versus them squabbling that's going on, beyond all of this unhealthy division, the fact that we disagree is actually a necessary and even wonderful thing. There's a popular lie out there that says that organized atheism is just another religion. Have you heard this? Christians like to throw this one at me. Atheism is just another religion. And especially if you attend an atheist conference or participate in any organized way. They just love saying that you're just going to the church of atheisms. People see groups and gatherings and organized efforts and brands and any notion of a movement. They see it as religious. By nature, it's religious. And many atheists say, you know what, I'm not doing it. I'm not going to join. I'm not a joiner. I didn't leave one church to join another church. I didn't leave one religion to join the religion of atheism. And I find this unfortunate because I think many of these critics are missing out. They're just missing out. They're missing the point. When did communal human activity, organized activism, and community, when did that become church property? When did that happen? Long before any notions of organized religion, human beings were doing what human beings do. We were gathering, we were sharing, we were supporting, challenging each other, banding together to achieve common goals, sharing life together. These are human tendencies, human desires to connect and achieve and share human endeavors and experiences we can enjoy together, we can participate in together. Are we really going to agree with religion when it says, hey, we own community? Are we going to agree with them? If gathering together to share and enjoy and pursue common interest is religious, by nature religious, then every rock concert you've ever gone to is church. Every chess club you've gone to is church. Comic-Con, that's church. Bowling night is church. Family dinners, political rallies, movie premieres, business conferences. Almost every time we get together as human beings to connect and interact, and join forces and to see and hear and do anything beyond our own individual circle, we are religious. I mean, what a ridiculous notion. It just makes no sense. And this surrenders ground to the church that doesn't belong to the church to begin with. It is not the church's sole domain. Religion does community and activism, and it does it really well. It's really good at it, but it doesn't own it. It doesn't own you and me, and it certainly does not own the idea of communal goals and endeavors. I love the idea of community. I just love it. And organized atheist activism, because I genuinely enjoy people. Well, I genuinely enjoy most people. And I am convinced that we're stronger and more effective in numbers. You know, would I rather be a single soldier who's outside this fortified castle wall throwing stones at it, right? Trying to defeat religious privilege? Or would I prefer to be part of a well-armed battalion of soldiers with worthy weapons and a battle plan, trying to defeat what we consider to be a dangerous enemy? You know, allowing ourselves permission to participate in a group does not mean we have sacrificed ourselves to groupthink, that we've given up our individuality, that we've surrendered our minds, that we're walking lockstep like drones, that we're sheep to be herded. It doesn't mean that. It simply means we are adding our individual voice and talents and abilities to the larger mission of defeating superstition. And we can be true to ourselves while also remaining true to the larger mission. And the fact that we're seeing public disagreement is proof that atheist activism, the movement, is not a bunch of glassy-eyed sheeple who are following a secular Jim Jones over to the Kool-Aid stand, right? It's proof that we are not all drones and clones and that we've surrendered ourselves. The fact that we're seeing analysis and criticisms of atheists by atheists on every tier. This is a loud revelation that we are not pounding the church drum of blind faith or blind obedience. We disagree, we say so. Hopefully, we do so respectfully, with a charitable ear, with an aversion to unnecessary escalation, and with a genuine desire to see the best ideas win the day. Now, I think disagreement is a necessary and wonderful check and balance. Now, beyond that, beyond the healthy disagreement, do you and I see the unhealthy, the unnecessary squabbling and the squaring off, the labels and the insults, the choosing of sides, the devolution of discourse? Those who are watching these very loud and very vitriolic arguments, usually on the internet, they're understandably weary. Many of them say the movement is just too splintered, it's too divided, it's too scarred, it's too broken, and they've just packed up and walked out. As atheism is merely the non-belief in gods, there's this whole spectrum of humanity that claims the label of atheist. And just like we see with any culture, any demographic, any shade of humanity, there are wonderful atheists and there are terrible ones. Charitable atheists and selfish ones. Kind atheists and cruel ones. Rational atheists and irrational ones. Champions for equality and bigots. Beautiful people and awful people. This is a hard truth. I used to think that atheism would automatically lead people toward a better, more rational, more kind, more enlightened, more humanistic, more generous, more worthy attitude. It does happen. It happens a lot. But you and I are fully aware that atheism is not a guarantee of goodness. and that the bad operators out there can really ruin the day. We have to acknowledge it. There are sexist atheists, misogynistic atheists. There's a lot of them. Visit almost any comments section and start a conversation about sexuality or women or mention feminism or whatever, and just watch the comments section. They will emerge and reveal themselves. Unfortunately, you'll find racist atheist, bigoted atheist in every way. There are atheists whose calling cards are controversy and cruelty. There are atheists, even atheist activists out there who seem to have almost no interest in building up. They just want to tear down. And some people say Christianity has a dark side, right? Islam has a dark side. This political party has a dark side, and they're right. This social cause has a dark side. We also have to admit that atheist activism has a dark side. It has its own toxic shades, its own awful people, its own lowest common denominator. Yeah, they're popular. They are a shallow pool, but they are alarmingly wide. And they're waving the atheism banner as they recklessly and gleefully try to set fire to good people and worthy goals so that they can just sit around and dance upon the ashes, right? They just want to watch the world burn. But they're not you. They're not me. They don't define us. They don't define our values, our goals, our mission. Their existence is an unfortunate reality, but it doesn't invalidate the merits of atheist activism as a whole. Right? Division is their oxygen. Escalation is their oxygen. Childish and cruel provocation is their oxygen. So what do? Too often we allow ourselves to get sucked into their little feedback loops. Right? Many times we have the best of intentions, and then we spend days, even weeks, trying to explain nuanced positions to deaf ears in 140 characters. And we finish the day exhausted and exasperated, and frustrated. We're upset that we haven't been heard. We are already preparing to start another long chain of social media arguments on Twitter the next morning, somehow convinced that, we're going to change the world, or at least change minds on Twitter. All it's going to take is just one more post, and maybe they'll see the light. I mean, no wonder the gallery's exhausted out there. No wonder people, spectators, viewers, participants, members of the community are exhausted. I totally understand. Thousands of people watching public figures, atheist activists pounding their keyboards with increasing frustration and intensity. And they just become frustrated by osmosis. Or because we are often a culture of activists, and we have the internet bullhorn at the ready, we just jump into the cage match. We pick sides, we fight for our side, we add our shouting voices to the deafening din, and we ourselves get sucked into days upon days and weeks upon weeks of this kind of tit-for-tat social media squabbling that almost never, and I mean almost never ends with resolution. With either side stopping to listen, to absorb the information presented, to treat the opposition with generosity and respect, and saying, you know what, you may have a point there. You may be right. Let's talk more. When's the last time that happened? The splintering of the atheist movement is actually a reflection of the larger information age culture, the internet culture. It's revealed both the best and the worst of humankind. We post links and articles that support our positions without fact-checking the sources, without vetting and doing our due diligence. You think atheists are immune from that? We are not. We easily slip into snark and sarcasm while communicating online. The ad hominem is right there. It's holstered at the hip, and it's just ready for the draw. We're ready to go after somebody. We become these dogmatic defenders of subjectively framed ideological purity, ejecting all the pretenders, right? We shun them. All non-qualifiers are now an out group, and they are out there beyond our walls, wandering, and we refuse to let them in. We just turn on each other. Human beings turning on each other. It is the sport of the internet age. And atheists seem just as eager as anybody else, if not more so, to do this. Maybe because many of our soapboxes are built upon sort of our anthills of enlightenment, or we bring in the baggage of personal experience. We all have our pet causes, the things we're passionate about. We all have our hot buttons. Maybe because we're a culture of strong activist personalities. Maybe because we just like to argue. And sadly, sometimes maybe it's because we'd rather see somebody else lose than see the best idea win. Now, I can already hear some of the complaints from some of my listeners. Seth is saying that we should all just live in an echo chamber and never challenge each other. Did I say that? Seth wants atheists to just march lockstep and surrender ourselves as individuals. Did I say that? Seth is saying that there aren't horrible and monstrous people in the world who have to be exposed and defeated. Did I say that? Of course not. But think about it. Think about how quickly some people were pounding that drum. They froth and they protest and they accuse and scoff. Now, why are some of those same people eagerly, gleefully trying to declare the death of atheist activism simply because the internet has amplified the worst along with the best? I'm going to take a short break. When I return, I'm going to continue with my final 2 points. Specifically, we're going to talk about these conferences that are supposedly dying on the vine. Yes, we're going to talk about the 2016 Reason Rally, which was a lightning rod for controversy. And I'd like to address the whole issue of atheism as a movement, because there are many people who say, well, there is no atheist movement. What's that about? What's my position on it? What do you think about it? We're going to get into all that in just a second. Natalie and I had a Halloween party this last Saturday. So instead of standard email invitations, Natalie decided to do this little box of Halloween goodies. It's an actual box that we mailed out. You open it up and there's like a little severed plastic Halloween finger with a reminder string on it that says, don't forget, plastic spiders and cobwebs and a bunch of candy and just fun Halloween stuff. It was really a novel idea. And so when it came time to address and mail these invitations, these boxes, we just walked into my office, we printed the labels and the postage, everything with stamps.com. We essentially did it in a few minutes, something that could otherwise have been just a huge pain, buying the separate postage and driving out to the post office to drop everything off. Stamps.com made it super easy, which added to the fun of the whole occasion. With Stamps.com, you can buy and print official U.S. postage for any letter, any package, any mail class using your own computer and printer. And especially since we have 2 more major holidays on the horizon. Holidays that feature cards and gifts and all kinds of mailings. Stamps.com can be the same fantastic resource for you that it's been for me. Right now, you can enjoy the Stamps.com service with a special offer. It includes a 4-week trial plus postage and a digital scale without long-term commitments. So avoid the craziness of the holidays at the post office. Just go to Stamps.com, click on the microphone at the top of the homepage and type in Seth Andrews. That's Stamps.com. Enter Seth Andrews. Stamps.com. Never go to the post office again. Thank you so much to those who support me on Patreon. They get a totally commercial-free broadcast every month. They get a bonus show just for them every month. It really does matter. It makes a difference. I'm hugely thankful for my sponsors. But if you would like to become a patron, that's appreciated as well. You can go to patreon.com/Seth Andrews. This broadcast is really an extended monologue. I thought about having various activists on to join me in the discussion, but I was a little worried that the minute someone who'd been out there as part of the online discussions and debates and, even bitter feuds about the atheist movement here in the year 2017, they would see an activist name on the roster and they would immediately just write the whole show off. Oh, look, it's so-and-so. Well, I'm not listening. Or look, it's such and such, and I'm not listening. Or they're going to say this. Or I already dislike them as a person, so I'm not going to bother with them. And I wanted to avoid all that. So, there are some who are going to wonder why I didn't bring a slew of guests onto the show. And the truth is that I just wanted this show to be a perspective that you could take or leave, that you could absorb, that you could sort of mull over, agree with, disagree with, whatever. But I didn't want guest activists to sort of polarize the audience before we'd even started. And if we continue this conversation down the way, I might bring in some various people and perspectives from the atheist movement, and we'll hash it out even further. But for now, you're stuck with me, okay? And I'm up to the fourth of 5 points I was wanting to address here in the wake of these charges that the atheist movement is dying. Point number 4 that I hear out there is that atheist conferences and events are dying. They're waning. I have a theory on this one. I think what the critics mean, or many critics mean, is that like the 2016 Reason rally was a letdown. And a few of the national and regional conferences have seen a dip. Some of them seen a significant dip in attendance. So therefore, the atheist conference circuit is on the bubble, right? It's over. This is what they like to say. I was at both Reason rallies. I had a blast at the 2016 Reason rally event. Was it a failure? I don't think you can call it a failure, no. Was it a huge success? No. I mean, certainly not compared to the original Reason rally of 2012. I did a mostly favorable video about it because it was a positive experience. I really did enjoy myself. And for the record, I thought Liz Liddell, who is a friend and somebody I really respect and admire, did a great job as she sort of stepped in to what had ended up being kind of a wild and messy, chaotic situation there on the organizational side of the Reason rally. I think she just did a tremendous amount with what she had. Hemant Mehta wrote what I thought was a really thoughtful article on the many possible reasons for the lower attendance and the lackluster outcome of Reason Rally 2016. I thought his was one of the few fair examinations of an event which saw, I think, 5,000 people instead of 40,000 that they'd seen in 2012. And I agree with many of the critics that the Reason Rally should have been more about atheism and atheist activism and science education. It should have featured many more of the familiar faces and voices that comprise actual atheist activism. No less focus on getting big-name celebrities like Johnny Depp, right? Johnny Depp's going to be there. And then he canceled at the last minute, and they had a bunch of dry speeches, one after the other, and this focus on things like marriage equality. It's an important topic to discuss, but we have to remember that in 2015, the year before, the Supreme Court had already weighed in, had already ruled on the legality of gay marriage. That means that social activists at the Reason Rally were fighting a battle that had already been won legally, right? There was, I think, a loss of novelty. There was a speaker lineup that was good, but not amazing. It was a June event instead of a March event. It meant that some might have decided to take their vacation time and take a vacation with it. A host of other potential reasons, all playing into what was really an enjoyable day that could have been much better. It could have been much better, but it was still an enjoyable day. And yet, before the 2016 Reason Rally even happened, many public critics, many of them atheist activists, were already calling it a failure. A lot of these guys took these unflattering photographs that they'd found online, and they sort of circled the dead space where the grass was and said only 500 people showed up. They were just lying. They were just being dishonest, gleefully announcing the death of the Reason Rally and then the death of the movement. And they painted whatever agenda, whatever soapbox, whatever pet peeve they had into the reason that it was dead. Other people made videos. They wrote nasty blogs. The death of the atheist movement is taking place and we are witness. National conferences across the country. Some saw a dip in attendance. Yeah. But you have to remember that starting about, I think, 2013, there was a con on almost every freaking street corner. There was this con and that con and this con and that con. There was conferences every 5 minutes somewhere. And they used to be kind of a novelty. They used to be more of an event. And then they became so commonplace that the urgency went away. Now, even though some of these national conferences, the more expensive ones that require a weekend hotel and some big tickets to be able to get all these big name speakers in, we've seen them decrease in popularity. We're also seeing a tremendous amount of successful and very well-attended conferences with diverse speaker lineups surviving and thriving from coast to coast. They're chugging right along. My individual speaking tour stops, I probably do 35 dates a year. We see packed houses wherever we go. People are eager to get together, and we have tremendous success. It was only this summer, Imagine No Religion 7 had a great turnout in Toronto. The Florida Free Thought event in Orlando less than 2 weeks ago, it had more attendees in 2017 than it did in 2016. Dillahunty just got back from London. He was part of a big event with Richard Dawkins and Sam Harris. They had over 3,600 people in the audience. PastaCon in Pittsburgh just had a major event, a successful October conference. They again capped the whole weekend by gathering the speakers and attendees together in a big room, and they assembled tens of thousands of meals to distribute to homeless and disadvantaged people, making a positive difference in their community. And American Atheist just announced that they are now preparing for a big event in the spring of next year that's going to happen in the buckle of the Bible Belt in my home state, Oklahoma City. Now look at the speaker lineups of these conferences. The speaker lineups are strong and they are diverse. The attendees are enthusiastic. They are hugely interested in building friendships. They want to learn stuff. Even the tragic anomaly of the recent MythCon circus in Milwaukee, that hasn't nullified all of the many other wonderful conferences out there, nor does it define the temperature, the goals, the mission, the character of all the other organizers and events which foster goodwill and quality content and a full cast of credible presenters and a safe and enjoyable atmosphere for everybody. My final point, number 5. They say atheism isn't a movement anyway. Atheist movement? There is no movement. And I will say on the surface, this is absolutely correct. Atheism is simply the lack of a belief in any God anywhere, period. Atheism, the lack of belief in gods. This is a noun. It is not a verb. I get it. Atheism, it does not dictate or mandate anything. No action, no mission, no activism. But I disagree that we can't use that rejection of gods, the disbelief in gods, to inform our fight against the planet's bad ideas, which are so very often informed by the belief in gods, right? The fight to prevent gays from having marriage equality. Well, that's almost always driven by religion and religious notions. My atheism speaks to that. The fight to prevent women from having control over their own bodies and their own reproductive choices, this is usually an agenda driven by religion. My atheism speaks to that. The fight to keep religious dominionists from denying climate science and saying it's all God's anyway and he's going to come sweep up, so let's just party and destroy the earth. Those people exist, right? The earth belongs to God. It's arrogant to think we can do anything to harm the planet. We should just do what we do. We have been given dominion over the earth. Those people are operating from a religious agenda. My atheism speaks to that. The fight to protect church-state separation, my atheism speaks to that. The fight to defeat religious extremism, ISIS and other organizations that are doing so much harm, my atheism speaks to that. My desire to see people take off their God glasses so that we can all see and solve our many problems, rooted in the real world and seeing things clearly as they are. My atheism speaks to that. Now, if you want to be pedantic, fine. You can just fold your arms and you can say, well, atheism is a kind of a philosophical nothing. But personally, I just think it's hugely untrue that the rejection of magical thinking can't inform our acceptance of rational thinking, our battles against religious privilege, our promotion of scientific discovery, and our passion to promote humanism because there are no gods to help us. And while some people are just eagerly shouting about the death of atheism, or the death of the atheist movement, what we are increasingly seeing is the death of religion, or at least the marginalization of religion here in the United States. Religious fundamentalism is melting away. Millennials, they're leaving the church in droves. There was an October 16th article by the Pew Research Center that revealed that the majority of Americans say it's not necessary to believe in God to be moral. Could you have thought this possible just a few decades ago? Think about it. 56% of Americans admit that people can be good without any God. And that number continues to go up. It's not time to dance and declare victory, not even remotely. But the tide against superstition is rising. This is an exciting moment in our history, certainly in American history, as we see the panic of the fundamentalists, the religious fundamentalists, in the shadow of their own impending irrelevance. It's coming. And they're freaking out. Meanwhile, the writings and the speeches and the videos and the podcasts and the conferences and the overall activism of a huge variety of activists continues. It's far from irrelevant. It's far from defeated. It's far from dead. And while you and I are always going to have to deal with the trolls and the shock jocks and the malcontents and the agents of chaos and the bad faith operators and the lowest common denominators out there, the idea of atheist activism, the defeat of superstition and the embrace of reason, that's going to continue, and it will continue to be worth fighting for. Now, I know I've taken a lot of your time, but I want to finish the show with one last thing. I want to read you a letter that I got on the 17th of this month in my email inbox. I read the letter out loud to my wife when I got it, and I said to her, this is why I do what I do. After all the drama and the chaos and the squabbling and the division and the splintering and the bad people and the noise and the frustration and all those types of things, all that stuff seems so relevant when you're near it. But when you step back a few paces and you let the air clear and you take a breath and you refocus on the larger mission at hand, this email was a reminder of why I do what I do, what I want to accomplish in this world, and why it's so important that we look past our pettier differences and work together. Why there's a much bigger, more important battle that we have to win against a long-standing and hugely well-organized and well-funded opponent, this religious machine that's been on the offense for thousands upon thousands of years. I'm reading the letter with his permission. The gentleman's name is Bryce. He said this: I feel like I have a story to tell, and that is largely because of you. I'm a teacher. A large part of my identity is my teacherness, and this is something I've always been very proud of. I love my job, and I love my students. I currently teach in a very poor and very diverse district. The events of the last presidential election had a profound effect on our school and community. I teach choir, and all the freaks and geeks are my kids. Those few months surrounding the election and inauguration, not to mention the year of bullshit leading up to those events, may have been the catalyst in my life that pushed me over the edge. I was raised in what I have always considered to be a very unique church. When, quote, outsiders would ask me about my faith, I would shy away or avoid the conversation if I could. But if they were persistent, I might say the following. I would say, well, we don't really have a name. Or, we are a non-denominational church that meets in homes. Or, we don't have an organized board or a building or a website. Or, we believe in the Bible and prefer to read the Old King James. Our ministers are called workers. They do not marry, they do not collect a paycheck, and they never own any property or other investments. Our workers are cared for entirely by believers. They even stay in our houses with us. Hopefully at this point, whomever I was talking to would lose interest, and the conversation would end. However, for a few lucky girlfriends and curious others that crossed my path throughout my high school career, they might go on to learn more fun facts about my church. Fun facts like, no one in my church has TV. Or if they do, they hide it when company comes over. Women wear dresses, they have long hair, and don't wear makeup or jewelry. Men have short hair, likely no facial hair. If you engage in conversation with one of us long enough, you'll likely hear us refer to our faith as the truth, capital T, the truth. Although this term is usually only used among other believers. Words and phrases like convention, workers, meeting, gospel meeting, overseer, companions, Special meetings, Bible study, fields, emblems, and others were commonly used vernacular in my upbringing. It was always fairly uncomfortable for me to try and explain my faith to my non-faith friends. I believed wholeheartedly, as I was taught that the truth was the one and only true way. We were cautious to use the word Christian in public forums because we didn't want to be mistaken for all the other fake Christians, and anyone who's not a part of our faith is either wrong entirely or not even a real Christian. It was awkward for my friends to find out that I believed they were all going to hell, even the ones I really liked. See, you had to profess and then be baptized. Then you had to commit the rest of your life to going to meetings. If you didn't do all that, how could you possibly be saved? Dating was very difficult. It was frowned upon to date outside of the faith. School events were worldly. Sports promoted aggression, competition, and physicality. The arts promoted gay tendencies and put you in harm's way of coming into close contact with liberals. I could go on and on like this for a long time. This closet is deep, and there are a lot of skeletons. Bryce says, to make my long story shorter, I'll skip to the present to tell you that I'm okay. In fact, I'm better than I've ever been. I am an out and proud atheist, and even my family is showing signs of liking me again, despite us never officially having had that conversation. My family's aware of my feelings, but we will likely never talk about it. I've been out to my wife and closest friends since July of this year. My family became aware of my, quote, new lifestyle choices in August, but I think they were suspicious before. This is the part of the story that involves you. It was right after the election. It was cold and rainy, as it usually is in Oregon for most of the year. I was having shit day after shit day. I was sad, lonely, frustrated, aching for the pains I witness in my students, and feeling completely lost in life and purpose. And one night around 2 a.m., I believe it was, as my wife slept soundly next to me, I reached for my cell phone from the bedside table. I opened up my internet browser and I typed into the search bar, "What is atheism?" I'm not sure how close to the top your name appeared, but I know it was in at least the top 5, because I found your website, I discovered you had a podcast, and I downloaded your first episode. Saving that for the morning, I quickly glanced over a few other websites and went to sleep, satisfied that at the very least I had a plan for the morning. My plan was to do more research. The next morning on my drive into work, I listened to your first podcast. I was intrigued. I felt simultaneously a feeling of attack on everything I knew and held dear, but also solidarity. In my discomfort, I continued to listen to your podcast. Over the next few days, I listened to every single one of your available episodes on iTunes. It was a lot to take in, but I was starving for information, and I sucked it all up as quickly as I could. It was from your podcast that I first heard the names Christopher Hitchens, Sam Harris, Richard Dawkins, Daniel Dennett, Neil deGrasse Tyson, and others. It was from your podcast that I heard about and read several great books that changed my life. I started consuming information around the clock. For the next few months, every waking second of free time was spent with my head in a book or on YouTube or listening to other podcasters. It has all been a bit of a whirlwind, but now, what an incredible change I've gone through. I know this is only the beginning, and my wife and I are just starting on a new journey due to all these recent changes, but I had to tell you just how instrumental you have been in positively affecting my life. I feel like I owe so much to you. Looking back, I must have always had doubts, and I was obviously sitting on a knife's edge, because as soon as I finally allowed myself to ask questions, to have doubts, everything changed. Everything. I would love to share more, Bryce says, but I want to be respectful of your time. I just wanted to say thank you. I don't know how to say it enough or how to impress upon you just how intense and wonderful your influence has been on me. I'm so thankful for you, for your guests, for your show, for your humor, for your stories, and for your compassion. Thank you. Now, I am convinced, and this is me talking, not Bryce, I am convinced that for a host of various efforts, videos, podcasts, speeches, conventions, whatever out there that are part of the quote-unquote atheist movement, there is a Bryce, someone like Bryce, who is desperate for good information, the encouragement that they can live their own lives on their terms, desperate to network with good people, to find and connect with people, since they very well might be losing community in their own life as they walk away from church. Bryce is a reminder to me that I am not, and you are not, and we are not locked into or chained to or defined by all the pettiness out there that so often gets the press. 100,000 planes will take off and land successfully today. The plane crash will always make the headlines, but it doesn't negate the worthiness and merit of being able to travel by air, right? The conflict and the nastiness will always get the most attention, but don't forget the tremendous amount of good being done and all of the necessary work that remains undone. Religious people out there will continue to declare that the atheist movement is dying because their narrative requires it. And God has to win in the end, according to their holy books, according to their stories. But it's religion that's scrambling to stay relevant in the information age. There are some atheists who, for a variety of reasons, will declare that the atheist movement is dead, maybe because they're unhappy with how it looks or feels or sounds or acts or reacts. They disagree with what it is and how it operates. They think the movement's become too big or too popular, or it's too slick, or it's too unlike them personally. What they're really saying isn't that the movement is dead. They're saying that the movement is dead to me. And that's not remotely the same thing. Whenever we see a scandal or a once admired activist who is linked to a terrible headline, some people will use that as proof the whole culture is guilty by association. The whole thing is circling the drain, and yet atheists of all shapes and stripes continue their work out there. We hear the apologists. They blame the godless for all of our planet's ills, and then they promote their own theocratic ideas about government. And then we see that membership is surging. It's surging at secular organizations that have pledged to protect the church-state line, etc., etc., etc. And it's my hope that you and I will use this opportunity to see the divisions we have for what they are, to cultivate positive conflict, healthy disagreement, to reject hyperbole so that whenever we do speak in the strongest language, it actually means something, and to remember that the world is watching us. And as they emerge from their own situations, they are trying to determine what a God-free, superstition-free, magic-free, dogma-free life might look like. What kind of picture do we want to present them? What kind of people do we want to be for them? What kind of messages do we want to promote for them? Are we promoting the best in each other and in ourselves? Thank you so much for everything you are and mean to me and this broadcast and this community. Thank you for listening. Above all, I want this broadcast to be an encouragement to you and a reminder that, yeah, we do have problems. Yeah, we have our issues. Yeah, it's not always pretty out there. But the work that's being done out there continues. The many, many gears in the machine continue to turn. The many, many shades of atheists and atheist activism continue to make a difference. It is working. It does matter. And most importantly, it does help people. So keep the non-faith, my friends. Be encouraged, my friends. Because the quote-unquote atheist movement is very much alive.
Follow The Thinking Atheist on Facebook and Twitter. Watch dozens of original videos on the Thinking Atheist YouTube channel. And visit our website for resources, links, contact information, the editor's blog, and more. thethinkingatheist.com.